Eee. I'm like adjusting to having the video there. We literally do church in a karate studio at RB. We like have our neighbor and they have a dojo and that's where we do our karate. So we don't get cool videos yet. But so that threw me off. But go ahead and open up to James chapter 1, verse 15 is where we're going to be looking at. Shoot. Dang it. We're good. We'll roll with it. Man, I'm so pumped. If you're looking for James, it's in the back of your Bible, right after Hebrews. If you hit Revelations, you've gone too far. It gets weird there. But James, towards the back of your Bible. And yeah, I love NineTen so much. But yeah, I've this week has been like an emotional roller coaster thinking about it. Just because I've spent the last 6 years of my life here. Like Gregor was a freshman, or you were a sophomore when I showed up here. And you're like, no way, I didn't. Gregor's like so old. But yeah, like I don't know. I've been here for so long, and even like that. And we'll talk a little bit more about this, but. Yeah, I showed up 2 years into my walk with Jesus here, and I don't know how I tricked them into letting me work here. I was like, I haven't read like 2 books in the Bible yet, but I'll teach it. And so I showed up here, and then 6 out of the 9 years of my walk with Jesus, I've gotten to like spend in this room. So yeah, I love NineTen. This isn't a like, God, I can't wait to get out of here. Like, it definitely does not qualify for worst job. Halloween store reigns supreme in that one. But yeah, I love NineTen. This staff is like, they're like my friends. Hunter's been my best friend for 5 years, and we've gotten to watch NineTen just go from one ministry to a completely different ministry, and yet all through the same time, just getting to celebrate God working in the lives of high schoolers, and just there's so many exciting memories there. And yeah, Austin and his wife have been just like 2 of the best friends that I could ever ask for, and Charlene and her fiance are just, again, 2 just special friends to us. So Tanner, who's not here right now, but yeah, Tanner's been another just dear friend of mine. And yeah, I'm not in a rush to leave, but just season in life, it's been my dream to just go do ministry wherever. And I always hoped it wouldn't be as close to Escondido as it is. Escondido feels like my Nineveh. It's just like I don't want to be there, but I'm down. Let's go and do it. So that's a Jonah reference. Jonah hated Nineveh. He wanted nothing to do with Nineveh. I always thought Escondido was like, it's hot, it's far from the beach, and now I'm working there, so I love it. But yeah, I guys, you guys are in one of the most special ministries ever in churches in general. Like, I'm very aware that half of you are about to move up and go to 11-12, and I hope that you don't ever get used to how special of a place NineTen is, and 11-12, and just North Coast in general. Like, all campuses collectively, like what God is doing through this church is just amazing. And yeah, I'm just like, I feel like I know that you guys get to keep walking in that, and that's so exciting. So yeah, I'm so excited, and I hope that you guys know that yeah, I love all of you guys. And as I just kind of wrestled with this message, I just went like, what do I want to tell them? And I feel like if you don't know, I didn't grow up in church. I had this upbringing with 2 parents who really just didn't really have an idea for religion or church. My mom would go like, I think God's real, but I don't need to pray, or I don't need to go to church, I don't need to read my Bible. I didn't know that though. And then my dad is just like not interested in religion at all right now. We didn't fight about it. It wasn't this like, we weren't these raging atheists. We didn't really care. That's just how we lived our life. And I think for me, having no context for church, when the gospel showed up, there was this, I didn't know there were so many questions to the answers that I had in my life. And I recently discovered that I'm allergic to shrimp. You're like, whoa, big plot twist right there. I know. Some of you are like, bummer. Others of you are like, good. They're like shellfish or like insects of the sea. Why do you eat them? But the less you think about it, the more tasteful they are. So whatever. But I just always grew up eating them, and I don't know. My parents never tested me for food allergies, so I would just eat shrimp, and I liked them. And I grew up on a boat with my grandpa, and like I just ate seafood all the time. And yet I thought shrimp just kind of left a funny feeling in your mouth when you eat them. Like my mouth would get a little numb every time I would eat shrimp, and I went about life believing that was just how shrimp worked. So I would just, yeah, I never questioned it. I have a tendency to not question the important things in life and question everything else. And that was like one of them. I took shrimp I was like, you taste good, but it's kind of like pineapple. You're like, you just can't eat too much of it. Otherwise your mouth really hurts. I don't know. I just thought shrimp were synonymous with pineapple, and never questioned it. And then last year, so this is literally how long it took me to figure this out. I just eat shrimp and deal with it. I made like so much shrimp when I was just craving it. I wanted it. I was just like, I had watched Ratatouille recently, so I was like, I'm gonna chef it up in my kitchen. And I just was like, I got the pan out, put the butter in it. I threw a whole bag of shrimp in there. And I'm single at this point in my life. I'm making this whole bag for me. I'm not sharing this with Nemo. This is mine. All right. So I made probably upwards of like 12 something shrimp. And I was just like, I'm gonna eat them all myself. And not like little shrimp. I made big shrimp, all right? So big shrimp, funny concept. But yeah, so I like ate all of them naturally because I was hungry. And it wasn't what normally happens, but my like whole mouth went completely numb. I like couldn't feel my tongue, and I got like really scratchy, and I felt like someone had put a landmine in my stomach and then stepped on it. And I was like, what is happening to me? And I was like trying to just figure it out. I was like, I didn't undercook them. Like they were bomb. They were so good. And I was like, what is happening to my body right now? And I remembered like my grandpa's getting old, so we're like helping him with all his medical stuff, making a lot of his doctor calls. And I remember my aunt on a phone call talking to my grandpa's doctor, like, does he have any allergies? She's like, yeah, he's super allergic to shellfish. And I was like, oh gosh, I have a shellfish allergy and I'm about to die in my house right now. So I like run upstairs. I'm like, yo, Nemo, I might die right now. Like I just ate a ton of shrimp. I think my face is turning off and my insides are shutting down. And I like called my aunt. She was like, Sean, like you might be fine. It's a progressive allergy. Like the more you eat it, the worse it gets. But like if your throat closes, you're gonna die. Like you need to have someone drive you to the hospital if it gets to that point. So I'm like, hey Nemo, cool, calm, and collective Nemo. If you guys don't know Nemo, he's like the best. He was a NineTen leader. He's just like the stoic man who played college football, and he's just like, he's got the same face 24/7 until he laughs. And then he's just like a joyful spirit. But I just go upstairs. I'm like, Nemo, like, I just found out I'm allergic to shrimp. Don't panic. I ate like 15 of them, and I might die. Like, can you just be ready to drive me to the hospital if that's the point that I get to? And he's like, in his bed. Yeah, sure, dude. So I just like laid down in the hallway next to him, like next to his room, and I was like, I'm just gonna sit here in case it gets really bad. And we just like hung out for a little bit. But I really think I lived a lot of my life believing that life apart from Jesus just had a funny aftertaste. And I never questioned it. I thought that as a person in the world, and I didn't have a context I wasn't rebelling against a Christian upbringing. I went about what the world told me was fine, and I never questioned it. And I grew up with a mom who couldn't walk or use her arm, so I chased this pattern of morality. I grew up my whole life being told that I was a good person. Like, oh, you're an only child with a mom who's like in a wheelchair. She can't eat her food, so you help her. So I use that as my banner of identity. Like I walked around believing that like I'm fine because I'm a good person. Like I take care of my mom, and yet like I was for probably 6 years of my life I was like a top tier fundraiser for the National MS Society, which is what my mom has. And like I would raise thousands and thousands of dollars every year with my group of friends to like help find a cure for MS. And right, like I ran in this morality lane of like, you're just a good person. And everyone would be like, oh, like someone with your upbringing, like with such a hard home scenario, you shouldn't be as good as you are. And that's just the narrative I heard. And yet I would go to bed and I would like sit in my room and I wouldn't always feel like that was true. Like there were things that I did. I was still like a jealous person, or I would get angry with my parents sometimes, right? Like that's a weird thing to wrestle with. When your mom can't walk or use her arms, you get mad at her, right? Like you don't go to bed feeling great. And yet, so there was this like constant narrative of like just be a good person and keep being a good person. And yet I'd go home and I didn't always feel like a good person. So there was a disconnect there for me. And then, right, like being an only child, and like if you couldn't tell by now, I was pretty awkward and weird as a kid. Like I was just like so shy. I like, not that that's necessarily weird. I was just also weird. Being shy is not synonymous with weird. I just was weird. So like yeah, I was just such a weird kid. I could tell you stories and stories and stories and stories, but I'm not going to. So because that would be embarrassing. But like I just grew up in this really shy, awkward state. Like I knew my life was different, and I was never like ashamed of my mom's condition, but I knew I was different. So I would show up to school and I felt different and I felt weird. So I wouldn't talk to a lot of people, right? But then you still grow up watching Disney movies going like, I want a princess in my life. That's weird. Disney should change. And more Ratatouille, less Cinderella. And yeah, so there was this like inkling of like I just want relationship. I want someone to do life with, and I want to be loved, and yet like I felt incapable of doing that. So I would still feel lonely at home. And my like resource to that was, all right, I also grew up in the just test experiment of social media, right? I remember the day Instagram showed up, and like I came to school and we were all downloading Instagram together, and Vine, if you even know what Vine is, and right, like Facebook was this new thing, and I was like, cool. What could go wrong with this? And right now we have these like crazy addictions to social media, and right, none of us were ready for what it did, but like we never questioned it, we just did it. So there was this like you would just message people trying to like find relationship, going like, well, this seems like risk-free. I'll just message people. So I would try and do things like that. And right, like pornography was incredibly accessible and still is. And right, so these were the ways that I tried to cope with loneliness. And right, like I did these things because no one ever told me that there was something better. And yet at the end of all of it, you would wrestle with shame and you would wrestle with guilt, having no context for the byproduct of sin. And I just went, it's like shrimp. But inside of all of us, whether you grew up in church or not, there's an allergy in us, and it's sin. We were never meant to dabble in it. We were never meant to play or to eat in it or to experience it. And in fact, right, it's not so much shellfish, but it's hellish, right? Like there's this allergy inside of us that maybe it's edible, but it's progressively eating away at us. It's progressively getting worse and worse and worse and eating away at our soul. And right, like my aunt said, at the end of enough shrimp, you could die. Right, and I just didn't know that. And it wasn't until someone sat with me and went, let me tell you about Jesus, that really changed in my life. That I just thought I would live the rest of my life trying to fit the world's like model of living for me, and that I would have to go to bed and I would have to wrestle with shame and guilt and just accept it. And yet the gospel invites us into something greater, a life apart from those things, a life apart from sin, a life apart from shame and guilt, that you actually don't have to live in that. And will we wrestle with it the rest of our lives, knowing Jesus? Absolutely. But there is a Jesus who goes, let me help you leave that life, and that you don't have to just stay there. And I think this is what James is getting at here. That as Austin kind of opened up the book of James for us and talked about this idea of being double-souled, that there is a war that our lives fight trying to walk in the model that God has set for us, and yet we get finished with a Wednesday or a weekend, and then we go and we try and live like the world, and this is, James is trying to drive this point here. And he puts these two worlds on trial. He goes, there's the world. It's the pattern of life that no one ever questioned. It's the acceptance of pornography in our culture, and yet for some reason the secular world is still going, maybe we shouldn't do this, but we're still addicted to it. It's the endless pursuit of relationship, of trying to find our identity and someone else seeing us or acknowledging us. And yet maybe sometimes that doesn't work. Maybe sometimes it fails or it shatters, or right, you feel incapable of pursuing it. And right, these are all lies that the enemy puts out. We're going to talk more about the enemy in a second too. But right, it's these things of life that we just went like, well, maybe if I want attention, then I have to go just like rage hard and party hard and be seen on social media. And yet it's tiresome. There's that inkling of going, something doesn't feel right here. And it's that allergy. It's going, we weren't meant to play in this world. And James goes, I'm going to put the world on trial, and then I'm going to go and I'm going to put Jesus on trial here. And go sell yourself to me. James 1:15. Says, when tempted, no one should say God is tempting me, for God cannot be tempted by evil, nor does he tempt anyone. And I think there's a moment to pause right there. Right? Before James goes into this conversation about the process of sin and its destructiveness and its death invitation into our life, James goes, I think sometimes we go like, I think God, as the creator of the universe, stands here offering us an opportunity to sin. And that's, James, that's not what's going on here. Right? There is never a moment that God is going, I'm going to put sin in front of them and kind of give them a license for it. Give them a reason to think that I'm okay with it. And then I'm also going to put like my way right here. But God never stands as the tempter in our life. God doesn't have this plan to just put these challenges in us and go, you can pick. God doesn't want us to pick the alternative. His heart is not for us to choose between those two things. His heart for us is to choose him. Right? But temptation does exist, and it's a product of our enemy. Right? Genesis chapter 3, we see this. That God designed us to be like him. That he makes man, he makes woman, he says, be like me. I've created you in my image to live like me, to experience the freedom and perfection and joy that I live in. And Satan, our enemy, goes, I don't want that for them. And he begins to whisper these temptations that are appeasing to our desires, that are slightly off, but they still speak to that desire in a way. But we have to make sure it's so clear that God is not going, like, he's not dangling opportunity to sin in front of us. You would have to question the love of Father who knows that something is destructive and harmful for our soul, and then he still holds it out as a possible option. But temptation is always first prompted by the enemy, but it might be used by God. Right? In that moment, there's a wrestle, there's a war, that's that double-souled moment that God is going, right, there is a redemption in that battle there for him. But that temptation is not from God. Moving further. Oh, I said 15. We're in verse 13. We're now at verse 14. But each person is tempted when they are dragged away by their own evil desire and enticed. And after desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin. And sin, when it is full grown, gives birth to death. Don't be deceived, my dear brothers and sisters. Right? And James begins to present this process of sin, this process of destructiveness, the process of the world and how it works in our life, and with a real enemy who whispers these temptations, who crafts these lies of deception and goes, I have an alternative for you. I have an alternative. And that's what James says, it's to be drawn away. It's the serpent, our enemy, standing before Adam and Eve and going, he said that if you ate from the tree of life, you would surely die. And he twists the words, but he offers them an opportunity. He goes, but if you eat it, you'll be like him. And he speaks to them. He goes, it's disobedience that makes you like God. It's disobedience that benefits you. It's not following God that's better for you, that's more fun for you, that's satisfying to your soul. And yet, at the end of it, if you follow this process, if you follow into being drawn away by the enemy, which requires our efforts too, right? We're not just like hopelessly in this tornado of sin, just like sinning. But there is an effort on our part. There is a real decision that happens there to go, I want to choose to not follow God's will for my life here. And that's because of the deception of the enemy there. Right? He's a crafty sucker. And he speaks into our life, and he looks at the desires of our hearts that can only be fulfilled by God, and he goes, well, what if something else could do it? Right? If you're lonely, what if that girl in your class could help? What if that guy in your class could help? Oh, that's too risky. What if you created this idea of love, this idea of like relationship? What if it was just pornography? It's risk-free. You don't even have to leave. You're designed for greater, bigger things. What if you just made a name for yourself doing good things? You have a God who sees you and knows you, but he sometimes feels distant. What if you just posted something, got some likes, got some comments? What if that was just enough? And yet it's not. So he creates this process, and it always ends up in sin. That word sin, it means to miss the mark, that the enemy has successfully crafted and tempted us and drifted us away from the life that we were supposed to walk in, to be like God. And yet sin, in its simplest definition, is to miss the mark. We have missed being like God, and that is when we begin to feel disconnected in who we are. Right? Me, who had no context for church, no context for the Bible, no understanding of the word sin, walked in disobedience and still went, something feels wrong here. It is interwoven in our DNA to be like God, and when we are walking off of that path, we go, something feels wrong. All right, death. This process, it begins with temptation. It begins with the whisper of the enemy. The second step is to be drawn away by our own desires. The third step is recognizing the deception of it. Right? He goes, it's a facade. None of it is true. But James goes, it always ends in death. And that word is thanatos. Thanatos. Anything that sounds like Thanos, we should be massively worried about. Okay, that guy's a bad man. Thanatos. I might be saying, it might be pronounced different, but it looks like Thanatos. Thanatos. And that word, it speaks of a physical, destructive ending of life. But it also, in its definition, is this disconnect of life with Jesus. So you'll see this word come up when someone dies. Right? Physically, they have died, and it speaks to the eternal separation that we have there. But it also speaks of the current life that we live, that to live apart from Jesus it's the same word, death, thanatos. And he goes, at the end of the enemy's process, at the end of following the world, at the end of missing the mark, we will always be met with death. And yes, that is true of today in our temperate, right? None of us, when we sin, drop dead immediately, right? It's like eating that shrimp one at a time. You're like, I'm good. My mouth feels weird, but I'm not dead. So we play with it. We go, like, what if, like, how much can I actually walk in before I actually die, God? And yet this word also speaks to the eternal death, the eternal separation, that after we have died, that there is a permanent separation from God, missing what it's like to be created in his image, to live with him, to find our life and our fulfillment and our joy in him alone. And it speaks to both, because that you can experience that here right now in sin. And that's that disconnect that we feel every day. Because there is a permanent death as well. This is what Romans 6 talks about. Romans 6:21 to 23, right? The wages of sin are death. It's the same word, thanatos there. the wages of the wages of sin are thanatos, that it's death, it's separation from God, it's a disconnect in our soul. Right, but alternatively, and this is where I think James begins, he shifts here. It becomes a salesman. You see John 8:51, right? That obedience, following Jesus' command, these are Jesus' words. He goes, if you follow me, if you follow my commands, you will never taste death. And that word death, again, is thanatos. If you follow me, if you walk in my footsteps, if you obey the commands that I have set before you, you will never experience that disconnect in your soul. That inevitably you will not end life in eternity apart from God, but rather in his freedom forever. Moving on. Just don't be deceived, my dear brothers and sisters. Every good and perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of the heavenly lights, who does not change like the shifting shadows. He chose to give us birth through the word of truth, that we might be a kind of first fruits of all that he created. And James gets crafty with it here. He gets poetic with it. He presents his best sales pitch. Right? I worked at a coffee shop for a little bit. I worked at two coffee shops. I worked at Starbucks and I worked at Revolution Roasters. Massively different worlds, right? But every now and then you would get these people that would come into Revolution Roasters, which is a lot more like a crafty quality. I'm trying not to offend Gregor right now, who works at Starbucks, but I'm just gonna go for it, right? Like, it's this actually good coffee shop that's like, remember, I worked at both, all right? I can say these things. I know. So, right, it's just like, it's just different, right? There's an intentional care that's put into them. I just feel like I'm attacking Gregor right now. He's famous on TikTok. He's fine. But you would get these customers that would come in, and they were just so they were so concerned about what type of beans they were going to buy and like the quality of the coffee, and they would ask us. They would almost challenge us to go, "Why should I buy your more expensive, supposedly better coffee than I would a cheap bag of Starbucks?" And I would go, right? I believed in one to be greater than the other. Right? I'm a cheap man as well, but I'm not gonna like waste my money. If I believe something's better, I want the better option. Right? So you would stand there and you would give them like your best sales pitch. You would try and sound like this intelligent like coffee guy, and they'd be like, "Well, like." I'd go like, what kind of coffee do you like, sir? And he'd be like, I like a lighter coffee. And I'm like, perfect, man. We have this Holy Go. It's that's what we called it, and it's kind of cool. But it was like it's a lighter coffee. It's got a floralness to it, like, and it's a higher elevation coffee. So the beans, because they're grown up higher, right? They don't grow as fast, so they take a longer time, but they're a lot smaller because of that. And because of that, each bean is actually, it's got more compact of a flavor in it. So when you open it up in a grinder, right, it releases a lot more flavor than a bigger bean would, or a cheaper bean, like from Starbucks. And so you would just like, you would give them your best, and you'd be like, and like, at its first pour, in its first couple minutes, right, it tastes like this really just bright, floral, fruity coffee with like a hint of cherry and chocolate and caramel in it. And as it cools off, right, its flavor actually changes a little bit. And it becomes this really smooth, elegant kind of tea. And right, you would just pitch them on it, and they'd be like grabbing 5 of them after that. And right, so this is what James begins to do here. He goes, I've just presented Starbucks to you, and it sucks. Okay, confirmation. Starbucks is the worst coffee ever. Now that he's given me license for this. So, right, he goes, right, the product of it is death. It's a bitter cup. It's a disconnect in your soul. And he goes, let me tell you about something better. He goes, there is a Father who cares about you, who loves you, who created you. He goes, he's good and he's perfect. And keep in mind, he goes, every good and perfect gift is from above. Right? And we have to hear, because I think some of us are going to go, but I've experienced good and perfect things, and they weren't from above. Right? Good and perfect in the Bible isn't just, it's not common definition. Good and perfect is only licensed to Jesus. It's only licensed to God, that nothing is truly in its humanity actually good. Romans 3 talks about that all of us are fallen. All of us fall short of the glory of God. So if it's good and perfect, it's only from heaven. And he goes, every good and perfect thing, if you think it's good and it's not from heaven, that it's not actually good for you. Right? And there are things that are fun and enjoyable, but the second they take the platform above God, we have missed the mark and we have allowed it to stand in a position that it cannot actually fulfill in our life. So he goes, every good and perfect gift is found in God and God alone. Perfect. He goes, God is perfect. How many okay things are there in the world that we just attach our souls to and go, this is fine? For me, it's surfing sometimes. But half the time, the surf sucks. So what am I supposed to do? Just collapse into depression? But a lot of us, we allow other things that aren't perfect to stand in the position of God as this fulfiller, the satisfier, the thing that connects who we are as a soul. He goes, perfect. God, he's omnipresent. He's omnipotent. He's omnipotent. He's all-knowing. He's all-powerful. He's perfect. He's always present. And for the one that goes, I'm lonely, God goes, I'm here. Find a time I'm not. You can't. Find a place that you can't find me. You can't. You're never alone. God, I'm scared. I'm confused. I don't know what's going on. I'm all-knowing. I'm all-powerful. I'm in control. And there is a comfort and there is a peace to be found in the perfection of God that meets every need perfectly, always. As a creator of who we are, he goes, I've got you. I know what you need. And I'm sufficient. I'm always able to give it. I will not fail that role in your life. I love that James calls him a father. For some of you, that might not be the best sales pitch. For some of you, it's you hear that, and it's not really associated with a great one. Yeah, I get that. And obviously, your context for it might be so different. But when we understand the role of a father biblically, you're met with such a different definition. When you partner that word with perfection, perfect father, right? That role of God changes a lot. That he sees you as his kid that he loves, that his priority is to care for you, to take care of you, to give you the best. He goes, let me be that role in your life. Right, and for some of us, that it might be the perfect sales pitch, that you have a really awesome dad, and right, God goes like, I'm even better. So you're like, sick, this is awesome. For others of us, right, the aspect of letting God be our father, it's something that needs to be redeemed and learned. And yet the more you press into that, I promise you that word perfection and good it's so true of him. And he goes, he's unchanging. Right, Genesis to Revelation, there's no fear that this God is going to change. That in 10 years, he's going to slip and hurt us. But he's unchanging. We see him love humanity in their creation. We see him love them when they fail. You watch him love the Israelites as they just like spit and reject him. That on a cross as he's being killed, he goes, I love you. Forgive them, Father. They don't know what they're doing. And at the end of his death, right, there's a resurrection. He goes, I love them, so I want to be with them. I don't want to just die. I want to live with them. And he goes, this good, perfect, unchanging Father has a gift. And we all love gifts. Right? And that gift it's salvation. It's the life lived with him. It's a life of just walking with Jesus. It's the gospel that goes, I've removed their sin, I've removed their guilt, I've removed their shame, that I've looked them in the eyes and God, I've known your offenses and I know there will be more, and yet I forgive them. You don't have to carry that burden anymore. It's getting to take that shame. It's getting to take that weird aftertaste of the world and go, I don't need to carry this anymore. And then partnered with that, he goes, there's life with me now. That you're not just waiting to find that freedom, but actively today in a relationship with Jesus, there is freedom, joy, and perfection to be found in that. And he goes, press into it. Stop walking in the world. Will we have our moments where we slip and we fail? Absolutely. But we go, God, you're forgiving. You love us. We can repent of that, and we can walk in this life that is good. Yeah, that's my heart for you guys. Right? I'm just gonna be at a different campus. I'm not gonna go like bye forever. But yeah, if this was the last time that you got to hear a message from me, I would go like, there's nothing better. There's just genuinely nothing better. Let me pray for you guys. Yeah, Jesus, we just thank you. Just for your goodness, God. That for some here, you've already told them that they know it, they're living in it. God, may this just be a reminder to keep pressing into it. And for others, God, maybe this is just an interruption and not caring. Maybe this is the first time they've ever gotten to hear these words. And God, we just pray that they would just get to experience your goodness, Lord. That they don't have to walk with a funny taste in their life for the rest of their life. But God, there is an invitation to freedom and joy. Yeah. God, we just ask that you would keep moving, you keep doing awesome things here and in all of these kids' lives, God. We pray this all in your name. Amen.